Thank you. I'd like to welcome my father here in person, my mother on Zoom, my grandmother from Connecticut, my chavusa, Dr. Andy and Radamir Schumann, whom we're going to hear from a little bit later on. We'll quote from him, some learning that we did, and all those who assembled. So I'd like to begin. This topic is apropos for a time since we just came off of the momentous July 3rd barbecue, which so many people, especially my parents, put in so much effort into making a success, to have a kosher barbecue for the town. Right now it is Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, the first of Tammuz, but I prepared this Sefer of Torah mostly during Sivan, in honor of a couple of yurtzeits. So first off is my great-great-great-grandfather, David Schonzeit. David was a butcher in Brooklyn in the late 1800s. This was in an era that kashrus was pretty schwach. It was known to be pretty weak. There were different scandals, deception, people not being honest about the kashrus of the products. And David, it's brought down in my family genealogy book, a past remembered that he maintained his butcher shop on the highest degree of kashrus. And there's a reason why it says on this gravestone that he was Jerry Shemayim B'Seser B'Galoi, that he feared Hashem in private and in public. And the butcher shop was one place that he demonstrated this. So his yurtzeit is not in Sivan, but his son, Avram Yitzchak Scheinzeit, we spoke about at length last year on the Sefer of Torah Sivan, his yurtzeit is in Sivan on Gimel, and he also is a butcher, and we don't know about the specifics of his butcher shop, but it says on his gravestone that he was Yirei Shemayim Be'emes, that he feared Hashem with authenticity. So I'm sure that Yirei Shemayim factored itself into his butcher shop and made sure that he ran it with the highest degree of kashrus. So this shir is in honor of his yurtzeit. This shir is also in honor of yurtzeit my mother's grandmother, Yetta Braden Bronstein. Grandma Yetta lived in New York, and she kept kosher, and my mother has fond memories of her being 8 years old, and my mother decided later on to start keeping kosher in her honor. So her yurtzeit is on Chaf Gimel of Sivan, so the shir is also in honor of her.
And her name for her.
And my name is Yonatan, is name for Yenta. And also my bar mitzvah parsha is Parsha Shmini. Parsha Shmini is the main source in the Torah for kashrus, so I think that's also why I felt a connection to this topic to be able to speak about it. So the first section we'll talk about is, when I first researched this topic, it seemed like most of the Mefarshim, most of the commentaries talked about the ills of eating non-kosher, but there are actually some Mefarshim who talk about the active positive benefits of eating kosher food. The Kli Yakar says that when we eat kosher food, we infuse our stomachs with holiness. When we eat kosher food, we infuse our stomachs with holiness. The Ohr HaChaim in Vayikra, later on, Perek Ches Pasuk Beis, he says that if a person eats kosher, one is he enters the light of the Torah into himself, and he strengthens his desire to serve Hashem. So that's a verse from the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh. Someone who eats kosher enters the light of Torah into himself and strengthens his desire to serve Hashem. Rashi in Vayikra in Shmini, he says that Hashem says that if we elevate ourselves in the mundane, then Hashem will elevate us in Olam Haba. And one area of the mundane being the regular, ordinary foods that we eat. If we elevate ourselves in that and eat kosher, then Hashem will elevate us in the world to come. Rav Hirsch is a major Maramakel, is a major source for. I want to welcome my friend Elias Tamarkin, who I know from Shiloh House in Stoughton. Thank you, Elias, for coming. Rav Hirsch is a major marmak, a major source for kashrus in a sefer called Chorei, Parak, chapter 68. He says that if a person eats a kosher diet, that will ennoble him for his mission. That if a person keeps a kosher diet, that will give him more fortitude, more strength, more vision, more clarity to accomplish his mission. Rashi, at the beginning of the section of Vayikra, Parak Yudal Pasuk Beis Dabru, he says that Klal Yisrael accepted the mitzvah of kashrus be'ava. What's this concept of be'ava? Rabbi Beer says that ava means appreciation. So Klal Yisrael appreciated that kashrus would separate us from the nations, and that would allow us to be devoted to Hashem. That's why we accepted the mitzvah of kashrus be'ava, out of appreciation for what kashrus will do to us, our distinguishing from the nations, and our devotion to Hashem. As always, I spoke a number of questions with Rabbi Nissen Dov Miller, who used to be the Rabbi Chaim, and Rabbi Miller told me that if a person eats for the right purposes, it makes himself more holy. One, if he's eating to serve Hashem, like the Shulchan Aruch and Or Chaim talks about, that if a person's eating with the kavanah, with the intention that he'll have the energy and strength to serve Hashem, this will make him more holy. Or if he eats a Shudas Mitzvah, like a Shabbos meal, that will also make him more holy. And eating can be viewed as an act of Ratzon Hashem, an act of fulfilling Hashem's desires. Rashi in Shemos, Parak Beis Pasuk Lamed, says that if Klal Yisrael separates from Nevelus and Trephus, then we'll be Hashem's nation. So we see from Rashi that being Hashem's nation is dependent on our separating from Nevelus and Trephus, from non-kosher animals, or I should say from kosher animals not properly slaughtered. And non-kosher animals, I'm sure, is included in that. And Rashi in Vayikra, Parak Yud Ches, Pasuk Chav Ches, says that Eretz Yisrael has a delicate constitution, that the land of Israel has sinners in it. It's not going to be able to tolerate it. It's going to spit it out. Rabbi Miller clarified for me, it doesn't mean they're going to get spit out immediately, like in the times of the Beis Hamikdash getting destroyed. It took like 100 years. But over time, Eretz Yisrael is not able to tolerate sinners and people doing Averis. So, similarly, Rabbi Gerkel, the Rabbi Stoughton, he told me that food contains the energy of Hashem. And the more delicate the system, the more refined the fuel needs to be. So for a high-performance automobile, it needs more refined fuel than for a more coarse, like a truck. So too, the neshama is a delicate entity and needs more refined fuel, like kosher food, as opposed to something that's more coarse, does not need as much refined, and can be non-kosher. Okay, do we have any comments on this section so far? Right, definitely. That's a reminder that Hashem is the one who created the food. Adam and Chava, their first nisayon, their first challenge was a challenge of food, whether or not to eat from the Eitz Hadas, the tree of knowledge of good and bad. That was the very first challenge that was brought to man, was a challenge in the area of food. Rabbi Emmanuel Feldman, the Rav of Atlanta, has a piece on the Starkey website, and he makes a number of points. One, he says that our service of Hashem has value when we have the opportunity to disobey. We're not like the Malachim, the angels, who always fulfill the Ratzon Hashem because they have no other choice. But our service of Hashem has value when we have the choice to obey or not, and we choose to listen to the word of Hashem. When we ask ourselves before we eat something, am I allowed to eat this? Am I milchig? Am I fleischig? Does it have a hechsher? As our mother mentioned, like what is the correct bracha on the food? Then this enables us to live above our base instincts. Our base instincts is if you want to see an animal, you can go to Crescent Ridge, see how an animal just eats grass as much as it wants. But a human has the ability to say no to himself and to be able to curtail his desires in this way. The Mesilas Yesharim, when he discusses kashrus, he includes non-kosher animals, but also he talks about meat and milk, kosher animals that are not properly shechted, and foods cooked by a non-Jew, which is bishul akum. Even it's kosher food. And Rabbi Miller explained to me that the Mesilas Yesharim picked out these cases because in these areas, the foods become prohibited to a person. Like a mixture of milk and meat becomes prohibited to a person. And these areas incur timtum alev, blockage of the heart. The Mesilas Yesharim says 2 reasons why keeping kosher requires carefulness. One is because non-kosher food is tasty. Like someone once told me who used to eat non-kosher that if that pizza non-kosher always tastes better because they put rennet in the cheese, or gelatin, which tastes better, and this is a product from a pig, so it's not allowed to be eaten by Jews in kosher pizza. So non-kosher food is tasty, and 2, kosher food is more expensive, as everyone knows that it costs more to keep a kosher diet than to eat non-kosher food. So for these reasons, the Mesilas Yesharim says that it requires extra carefulness to keep kosher, because non-kosher food is tasty and because kosher food is more expensive. Does anyone have any comments on this section? Thank you. Next section is titled Kashrus and Physical Health. The Sefer Chinuch in Mitzvah Ayin Gimel says that the body is the vessel, like the kli, the container for the soul, which is inside of it, to carry out its mission. The body is the vessel for the soul to carry out its mission. Certain foods are harmful for the body, and the Torah prohibited these foods. The Chinuch notes that not all of these foods will be recognized by medical personnel as being unhealthy, but the Sefer Chinuch Shita is that the reason why non-kosher foods are prohibited is because they're bad for the body. They're physically unhealthy. So my grandmother told me, she said that kosher food is healthy. According to Sefer Chinuch, my grandmother's right. Non-kosher food is unhealthy, and kosher food is healthy. My father says that many non-kosher foods have been found by medical personnel to be unhealthy. For example, shrimp is known to be high in cholesterol. And a different sefer I saw said that this may be a shittas of Rambam, and Rambam may also hold like this. But many of the Mefarshim do not agree with this mahalach. Moshe Feinstein in Kol and Shmini, he says, you can just see the facts on the ground. We see plenty of non-Jewish people eating non-kosher food, and they're fit and in good health. So it must be that non-kosher food is not unhealthy. Could be non-kosher food is healthy. Rabbi Yoni Monat in the Sefer The Laws of Kashrus, Rabbi Yoni Monat is one of probably the most renowned person in the 5 towns Far Rockaway area. In his Sefer The Laws of Kashrus, he brings from the Abarbanel a raya, a proof that non-kosher food is not necessarily unhealthy. The Abarbanel says that if the Torah were out to prohibit all unhealthy foods, then poisonous herbs would have been deemed non-kosher. The fact that these poisonous herbs are not non-kosher is a proof that non-kosher food is not necessarily unhealthy, rather that the foods that are non-kosher are for some other reason. And Rav Hirsch takes what seems like a middle approach. He definitely says that kashrus is not because of physical health, but he does say that if one eats non-kosher, his body will be less equipped to partner with the neshama. So that's Rav Hirsch's opinion. Kashrus is not because of physical health, but if a person eats non-kosher, his body will not be as equipped to partner with his neshama. Does anyone have any questions on the section of kashrus and physical health? One second. Let me turn it up. Okay, yes, about a minute. Well, just because a mitzvah is deemed as a chok does not mean that there's absolutely no reason. For example, the mitzvah of shatnez, some have come up with symbolisms why specifically wool and linen are prohibited, even though shatnez is recognized as a chok. And even the paraduma, which is the sixth parsha, there are many mefarshim who discuss the symbolism of the fact that the paraduma is mitame etmeim and mitara torim, that the dichotomy of the paraduma. So I think that just because something is a chok means that a non-Jewish government would not have decreed it. But now that Hashem decreed it, we can still look for reasons why Hashem made this gezerah. Okay, think of your question. Okay, now we come to the section of the personal temple. Rav Hirsch says that the Mishkan, the Beis Mikdash, the holy place where we serve Hashem, can become tameh, can become impure through impurities by touching the different kelim, the different vessels of the Mishkan with impure objects. Those items could become impure. Similarly, Rav Hirsch says that a person is like a mikdash, a person is like a holy space, and a person is holy, but could become tameh, could become impure through eating non-kosher food. The Rabbeinu Bechai in Vayikra Parak Yud Pasuk Gimel points out a halacha that behemoths, that animals that are not roid, that are unfit for the mizbeach, may not be eaten by a person. So if an animal cannot be brought on the mizbeach, it also cannot be eaten by a person. This shows a connection between that which is fit for the mizbeach, for the altar that we sacrifice korbanos to Hashem, and the personal mizbeach, the personal mishkan of the person. If something is not fit for the real mizbeach, it's also not fit for the mishkan of the person. Rabbeinu Bechai in Vayikra, Parak Yud Aleph Pasuk Mem Gimel, Rabbi Beer explained to me this Rabbeinu Bechai. Rabbi Beer is the Rosh Kol in Boston, and he's a big talmud of Rabbeinu Bechai. So Rabbeinu Bechai used the words mitame, and Rabbi Beer told me the halacha that if a person eats non-kosher, he's not eligible to enter the mikdash. Only a person who keeps a kosher diet is allowed to enter the mikdash. So this also shows that a person could impurify himself through eating non-kosher food and thereby not allowed to enter the mikdash, but a person who stays pure by keeping a kosher diet could enter the mikdash. This footnote to Vayikra Parak Yud Aleph Pasuk Beis says that staying to a kosher diet allows the Shekhinah to be present with us. Just like the divine presence was present in the Beis HaMikdash, so if a person avoids foods that will impurify him and sticks with a kosher diet, then the divine presence can be present inside of us. And I think all of the above is drawn from the famous pasuk in Parshas Truma, Shemos Parach Chaf Hei Pasuk Ches, Va'asu li mikdash v'shachanti b'socha. And you should make for me a mikdash, and I will dwell inside of you. The diak being dwell inside of the Jewish people, not just that Hashem dwells in the mikdash or in the Mishkan, but that Hashem dwells inside of the Jewish people. And as the Mefarshim are saying, Hashem will dwell inside of us. One prerequisite of that is that we stick to a kosher diet and avoid non-kosher foods. And the Ramila told me that complete hashgacha pratis, total divine oversight, is dependent on our keeping to a kosher diet. If we keep to a kosher diet, that's one prerequisite that Hashem will look out for us especially and carefully. But chas shalom, if we eat non-kosher, then Hashem will remove some of that specific oversight from us. Okay, does anyone have any comments about this question, about this section? Yeah, B'ezras Hashem. Okay, now I'd like to talk about, on the topic of Rabbi Meir's question about some of the reasons for kashrus, so from some of the Mefarshim. So first off, in Parsha Shmini, at the end of the parsha, the pasuk says, Parak Yudalef pasuk Mem Daled, Ki ani Hashem Elokeichem, because I am Hashem your God, V'skadishtem, and I will sanctify you, Yisem Kadoshim, and you'll be holy, Ki Kadosh Ani, because I am holy. So at the end of the parsha of kashrus, Hashem is telling us that we should be holy because Hashem is holy. And one way that we can become holy, one necessary way for we can become holy, is by sticking to a kosher diet and avoiding non-kosher food. And when we are holy, we emulate the holiness of Hashem. Rashi, at the beginning of the parsha in Shmini, Parak Yudalef pasuk Beis, brings a medrash of Rabbi Tanchuma. This is always a highlight learning Parsha Shmini, going over this Rashi. Rashi himself does not bring down the medrash, but he cites it. The Rebbeinu B'chai brings it down in full, plus a fina in the medrash inside. The medrash is as follows: there are two ill patients that come to a doctor, and the doctor sees one patient, and he says, "You can eat any food you want, whatever you want. You can have pizza, you can have steak, you can have ice cream, filet mignon, whatever. Eat and enjoy." The other patient, he says, "You have to have a very specific diet. You can only have lean meat, vegetables, fruit, no soda, no high carb, no high sugar, no high salt. Very specific diet." And what happens? The first patient, the one who the doctor said he could eat whatever he wanted, that patient died. The other patient, the one who was given a very specific diet, he lived many more years. So the doctor was asked, why did he take a different approach for these two patients? So the doctor said, the reason is because the first patient, I knew he was going to die in a short amount of time. There was really no hope for him. So therefore, I let him eat and enjoy his last few days. But the other patient, the one who was really healthy but had some issue, that if he was able to overcome this issue, he was able to live many more years. So I prescribed him a specific diet that allowed him to overcome his issue, and thereby he was able to live many more years. The nimshal is that the nations of the world do not have a neshama on the extent that a Jewish person has. They don't have the ability to connect to Hashem the same way that we do. So non-Jewish people are allowed to partake of all types of foods. Even foods that are not good for a neshama, but since they don't have that ability to connect on the same degree as we do, so non-Jewish person is Hashem let them eat whatever foods they want. But the Jewish people, we have the opportunity, like the Medrash brings from Devarim Parak Dalid, Pasuk Dalid, Vatem hadveikim l'Hashem Elokechem chaim kulchem hayom. And you are the ones who are clung to Hashem, your God, are alive today. We, the Jewish people, have the opportunity to have true life through connection with Hashem. And Hashem decided that certain foods are unhelpful to the neshama, and therefore Hashem prohibited those foods, because we have the opportunity to connect to Hashem on a higher way than the nations of the world. Because we have the opportunity to connect to Hashem, Hashem gave us a specific diet, told us to avoid foods that are not good for the neshama, and by sticking to a kosher diet, we'll be able to achieve Chaim Kol Chaim Hayom, that will achieve true life. Rashi Tevayikra Parachaf Pasuk Chaf Vav brings a member from Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah entertains a thought that many people have. So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says that when a person, like for example, if you go through Shaw's in Canton, pass by the organic fruit section, then go to the rest of the store in the back, pass right by all the non-kosher foods served behind the glass counter. So what's a proper approach? Should a person say, "Oh, this is terrible, I can't imagine it"? So Rabbi Katzin, Rashiva from the Five Towns, he did seem to say there may be room for that, but the straight read of Rashi and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is that a person could say, "I very, very well could partake of this food. This food is very tasty, and I would like to eat it. However, because Avinu Shabashamayim, our Father in heaven, decreed that I not eat it, therefore I'm not going to partake of this food." So on the straight read, it sounds like a person, maybe not the best approach to say I'm disgusted by it, but to say that this would be very tasty, but I'm not going to do it because Hashem decreed that I not partake from it. And we see from this Rashi that it's a decree of kashrus from our loving, caring Father, Avinu Shabashamayim, our Father in heaven, who wanted us to be able to have opportunities to have closeness with Him, and therefore He decreed that we not eat these foods which are detrimental. Rav Moshe Feinstein in Torah and Vayikra, on Rashi Parak Yud Aleph Pasuk Mem Hey, Rashi says that Klal Yisrael was redeemed from Mitzrayim on account that we not eat the shratzim, the creepy crawlers, the little insects that are prohibited at the end of Parashat Shmini. And then Moshe wonders, like, why is not eating creeping crawlers such a merit? Most people are repulsed by these types of foods. So Moshe says the reason why we're not eating these foods is not because we're repulsed by it, but because we recognize that Hashem decreed that we not eat from it. And by our not eating from it, because it's a decree from Hashem, therefore this is a significant merit, the fact that we're not eating the foods because it's Ratzon Hashem, because Hashem wanted us not to eat it, and therefore it's worthwhile that we got redeemed from Egypt. The Siddur Shel Shabbos, brought down in Artzol to Vayikra Parak Yud Aleph Pasuk Mem Gimel, says that we need to sanctify ourselves in the grub, in the physical, in the mundane areas. The road to Kedusha does not start from being out in the forest and contemplating lofty ideals and thinking about Hashem. A prerequisite to Kedusha is by sanctifying ourselves in the physical, in the mundane, by avoiding eating non-kosher food. Certainly it's a good thing to, like the Chovos HaLevavos, Shar Bechina, think about Hashem, think about the creation, but a person can't just be in the world of Medrash, he has to be in the world of Mesa. He has to physically change his diet, if he's eating non-kosher, and once he does that, then he can begin the road to Kedusha, the road to holiness. And the last point in this section is from the Kli Yakar, the Parak Yud Aleph Pasuk Vika Parak Yud Aleph Pasuk Mem Dalid, brings from Gemara in Shabbos Daf Kuf Dalid Amid Aleph, Habol L'Tayr Messiah Muso. Someone who comes to purify himself, they will help him out. Like my mother was talking about earlier, if someone purifies himself by abstaining from non-kosher, then Hashem will help his overall purity. If a person takes the first step to purify himself in the area of food, then Hashem will help him out overall in his kedusha and his holiness in all areas. Do we have any comments about the topic of spiritual reasons for kashrus?
Left out just hypothetically, the doctor says, sometimes when someone has a medical condition, they have to be on a low diet. Well, I guess that, and sometimes they're told don't eat kosher meat for the time and salt. But there are other things you can do. Be more vegetarian, I guess.
Well, I mean, the only time that it's really required by the Torah to eat kosher meat for an average person is the Korban Pesach. And nowadays we don't bring the Korban Pesach. And even on Shabbos and Yom Tov, it's not an absolute requirement to eat meat. Okay, now that we've talked about some of the benefits of kosher, it's important to talk about some of the ills of non-kosher. Rav Hirsch says two strong points about eating non-kosher. First, Rav Hirsch says if a person eats non-kosher, he will develop apathy towards avodas Hashem. He'll be like, he won't be motivated, he won't be driven. Shachs will be 6:45, 8 a.m., and he won't be moved to get up to go to it. There'll be sukkahs, he won't be moved to go get a little of an esrog. It's Pesach, he won't be moved to clean his house. Rabbi Katzin says that avodas Hashem, service of Hashem, should be our main geshmak. Our main enjoyment and enthusiasm should be derived from service of Hashem. If a person eats non-kosher, this is not going to be possible according to Rav Hirsch. Rav Hirsch is Rabbi Katzin's great-great-great-grandfather. So in order for avodas Hashem to be our main geshmak, to be our main joy, then we have to make sure to stick to a kosher diet. And two, if a person eats non-kosher, Rav Hirsch says that person will be less interested in making the Ratzon Hashem the dictating force in his life. Someone will tell him a halacha, someone will tell him that you have to stand up for your parents, and he'll be like, whatever, maybe yes, maybe no. The Ratzon Hashem, the desire of Hashem, is not going to be an important thing to someone who eats non-kosher. When a person eats non-kosher, he could have been learning in yeshiva 10 years, could have learned all the Musaf Sfarim, but if he eats non-kosher, then he's just not going to place Ratzon Hashem, the desire of Hashem, on him in a complete manner. The Mesilas Yesharim says that food becomes a part of a person. Unlike other mitzvahs which are performed with the bodies, with the limbs, but food actually is digested and becomes a part of the person. So how does this happen? So Gemara Yoni Monat Daf Lamed Testament Aleph says, if a person is metaming himself a little bit, then they will be metaming himself a lot. And if a person is mekadosh himself a little bit, they will be mekadosh himself a lot. Gemara Yoni was telling us that it all starts with small measures. If a person impurifies himself a little bit, then that'll result into much worse. On the other hand, if a person makes himself pure, then that purity will also extend much more. One of the Mefarshim, the Ein Yaakov, of Ian Yaakov, says that the concept here at play is when the the Mishnah Avos, Parak Daled, Mishnah Beis, Avera Geras Avera. That one Avera, one sin, leads to another sin. So I asked a couple of the Rebbeim the following question. If a person is on vacation, so what is so bad about eating non-kosher one time? It sounds like from the Ein Yaakov's Vart is that the issue is if a person habituates himself, then over many times, then non-kosher will have a negative impact. And that could be the Rav Hirsch also. Rav Hirsch's issues of eating non-kosher could be only if a person has a regular non-kosher diet. But what's the chasar and what's the lack of a person eats non-kosher one time? So Rabbi Miller said that in such a situation it's best not to look at the end results, but just look at the here and now. Hashem made a decree that we keep to a kosher diet that applies, like the Sefer Chinuch always says, b'chol makom v'chol zman, in all places, in all situations, except for pekuach nefesh. So even if a person's in a hard situation, it's important to try to hold strong and eat kosher, because that's the decree of the king, even for one time, not to stray and eat non-kosher. I mean, Naftali Minkwitz, one of the Rebbeim in Sharon, he brought me the Gemara in Kiddushin, Daf Mem with Aleph, came in Sha'avar Avera Rishana, Nasas Lo Keheter. That since a person transgressed an Avera, he did a sin, Vishana, and then he repeated it a second time, the Gemara says, Nasas Lo Keheter. It appears to him as if it's permissible. So when a person does one sin, he still realizes that it's wrong. But once he does it a second time, then he starts to think that it's okay. So Rabbi Minkwitz says that according to people who are mental health specialists, they say that addiction starts with one occurrence. That if a person tries one action, then that could eventually lead to addiction. And Rabbi Minkwitz himself told me that when he was in yeshiva in high school, there were some teenagers who tried some different behaviors, and at first they said, oh, I'll never get to like a very far off place where I'm doing very severe averas. I'll only do light things. But what happened was they started doing the light things, and then eventually it went out to that they started doing the much more severe things. So if a person eats non-kosher one time, they'll still recognize it's prohibited, but if this happens more and more, then there could become to be more of a slippery slope, and he could become to view non-kosher as if it's permissible. Now I'd like to bring down a couple mashalim, a couple examples, parables about what are the effects of non-kosher to a person. So first is from the Chavetz Chaim, he says in Parshas Shmini. The Chavetz Chaim's mashal is that there was a person who owned a store that sold sweet-smelling spices. That sold pumpkin spice, cinnamon spice, nice-smelling spices. And when he would smell a foul odor, he would be repulsed by it. He wouldn't be able to tolerate it. Then the business changed over, and he stopped selling sweet-smelling spices. And he opened up a tannery, which processes leather, which produces a very foul odor. So at first, on the first day on the job, he really couldn't tolerate the smell of the leather. But over time, more and more, as this became his normal place of operation, he became more used to the smell. This is the mashal of the Chavetz Chaim, that at first a person might view non-kosher food as like, I would never partake of non-kosher food. But then, if he partakes more of his food, like if he opens up the tannery and starts to smell the smell every day, then over time, the non-kosher food will be like keheter. It'll be like permissible to him. It won't be so reprehensible to him. It'll be something that he'll be able to tolerate. So that's why it's important not to even have non-kosher one time, as to not be margled, to accustom oneself to eating non-kosher over a long period of time. And this other mashal, which if you want to see it inside, you can look it up in the Article Chumash, by Rav Gedalia Short, at the beginning of Vayikra, chapter 11, Parak Yud Aleph. Rav Shor's mashal is that if a person has normal hearing, but then if he's subjected to a barrage of loud, harsh music over a long period of time, then eventually it will dull his senses of hearing and he will not be able to perceive fine sounds. So similarly in Ruchnius, a Jewish person is born with a pure neshama, but if a person eats non-kosher and accustoms himself, then over time he won't be able to taste, to attune himself to the nuances of spirituality. He won't be able to have ruchnius as he'll be able to perceive ruchnius and spirituality like the way he did before. And what's the nafkamina? So Rashi says that only someone who eats kosher will be able to learn chachmas Torah. And again, a person could have gone through Shas, could go through Shas 6 times like Avram Yitzchak, my great-great-grandfather did. But if such a person, even if a person is very learned, would start to eat non-kosher, he'll open up a Gemara and he'll be like, Omar Rava, what's that? Like, he won't be able to understand the Gemara. He'll open up a Chumash and it won't make sense to him. He's not going to be able to learn and understand the wisdom of the Torah if he eats non-kosher. It could be that Rashi got this from Bava Metzia Daf Nun Chesam Beis. The Gemara surmises that a person could think that if a person ate non-kosher, he would not be fit to learn the Torah from the mouth of Hashem. The Gemara is thinking that it could be that a person would think that if a person eats non-kosher, he's not going to be able to learn the Torah that came, so to speak, from the mouth of Hashem. And to conclude this section, the Lekach Tov, Parak Yud Aleph, Pasuk Mem Gimel, says, he brings the Lashon, Schar Aver Keneged Hefseda. If a person's faced with the opportunity to eat non-kosher, so on one hand he would enjoy the food, it would make him full, but he should consider the Hefseda, the fact that it could harm his ruchnius, his connection with Hashem, his interest in doing avodas Hashem, his making Ratzon Hashem the dictating force over his life, being able to perceive fine aspects of ruchnius, being able to learn the Torah. A person should keep these aspects in mind if he's ever faced a situation to eat non-kosher, and hopefully Hashem will be Niskaber, he'll strengthen himself in such a challenge. Do you have any comments about this section? Thank you. Okay, hopefully we'll talk about the section of being kind to others in the next section. Okay, so the next section is about non-kosher animals in specific. The Ramban, who's brought down in Kol Ram and Shmini, says that non-kosher animals are aggressive or cruel. The first points this out about birds. Non-kosher birds tear with their feet or their claws, whereas kosher birds eat directly with their beaks. First feels that's a less aggressive action. That's why the kosher animals which eat directly with their beaks are kosher, whereas the ones that tear with their feet or claws more aggressively are not kosher. The kosher kitchen, Sefer at Eitz Chaim, has a Mud Nesvara, has like an interesting perspective, that he feels that people, the reason why some non-Jews commit violent crimes is because they eat non-kosher food. He says since they're eating non-kosher food, which has aggressive nature, therefore it spills out in aggressive behavior amongst some non-Jews. Whereas Jews who don't eat these types of foods don't commit these aggressive behaviors. The first says that eating non-kosher will harm one's being adam l'chavero. He's not masber, but I think the reason why the first says that eating non-kosher will make a person worse in interpersonal relationships is because he'll be more aggressive and less patient. And a person needs to be patient and tolerant and to give the other person time and respect in order to do proper binyan l'chavero. But if he's aggressive and impatient, then he's not going to be able to do proper binyan l'chavero. The first also says that such a person would be worse to himself. I think the reason why the first says that a person who eats non-kosher will be worse to himself is because if he's aggressive, he's not going to be able to take a nuanced and balanced approach to himself to handle his different nidos and handle himself in a balanced manner. Rabbi Yochanan Levavitz Mashgiach Mir says that when an animal has a non-kosher trait, like for an animal to have not chew its cud or not a split hooves, a non-kosher trait stems from a deep impurity in the animal that's manifest in the non-kosher trait. The first says that eating non-kosher is a misuse of Hashem's goodness. Hashem is a tovu meitiv, Hashem is good who does good, but by partaking of the foods that he doesn't want us to partake of, that's misusing Hashem's goodness. Well, for many of us, shechita is the least painful process, and we try to inflict as least pain on the animals as possible. And the Ramah in Yeridea, Siman Pei Aleph, Sif Zayin, discourages having a Jewish child nursed from a non-Jewish woman. Because he says this, Matam Halevi Mololo Tavara. It stuffs up the heart and gives him a bad disposition. So it's not only non-kosher foods that's unhelpful for a person, but even the milk from a non-Jewish woman is spiritually unhelpful for a Jewish baby. It could potentially stuff up his heart and give him a bad disposition. Do we have any comments about this section? Thank you. Now we'll talk about specific non-kosher animals. Why is a chazir a non-kosher animal? The chazir is a pig, as Paskin in the Pasuk, Pasuk Zayin. So my Rashiva from Muncie, Rabbi Braun, quoted from Rashi that a pig has split hooves, but doesn't chew its cud. Split hooves is a chitzonius, the externals, but chewing its cud is a panemius, the internals. An animal that has externals, but isn't truly kosher on the inside, is not a kosher animal. Like my father says, if someone is pleasant with strangers, but is harsh to his family members, that's like someone who has chitzonius, he has the out is the externals, but doesn't have the internals. If a person is not kosher on the inside, it's not a kosher animal. Another question. Why is the chasida not a kosher bird? Parak Yud Aleph Pasuk Yitest. Rashi says it's not a kosher bird because it's not willing to be native to others besides its own kind. The chasida only does chesed with its own type. Rabbi Braun says that a Baal Chesed, a person who really does chesed, is compassionate to all people they meet. Jew, non-Jew, religious, not religious, male, female, young, old, all types of people. A true Baal Chesed, a truly kind person, is compassionate to anyone he meets. The Mesil Sharm says on Chasidus that a chassid is always trying to help out other people whenever they can, and always makes sure that they don't cause anyone harm. And Rabbi Braun once told us a story that a strange woman came up to him and his wife in their car and asked for some money, and Rabbi Braun, even though he's a Rosh Yeshiva, he's not swimming in cash, but he and his wife actually gave this woman $20. So that shows that it's a story that not only was he compassionate, but he actually acted on it, and he tried to help this woman out. Do you have any comments about this section?
Very, very important. Be kind to others. But I've got a question. The example, if you're kind to a stranger, like you come home and you're not somebody in your family, what if this person is eating kosher food? There's some wiggle room, I guess, in how much spirituality comes in.
Well, kosher, eating kosher is a prerequisite, meaning it's like the aleph, meaning without the aleph you can't get to base. But for sure, if you only have aleph, you're not going to get to tough. Eating kosher is the aleph. If a person eats non-kosher, it's going to be hard for him to have, like our first was saying, proper b'dan l'chavero. But in addition to eating kosher, then it's where the whole learning the Parsha, learning Rashi, learning the Mefarshim, learning the Mesil Shisharim, Chovos Levavos, Shari Tshuva, all the Musa Sfarim come in that trains a person how to act properly. But if he doesn't eat non-kosher, then it could be he could do all those other things and it just won't have an effect on him.
In my studies, as I said before, on basic history in our scouts, there were some non-Jews in France and probably other countries that hid Jewish people during the Holocaust. They just dealt with the normal thing to do.
Yeah.
There is peace, among all people, actually.
Okay, so it could be a couple of things. One is it could be that it's specifically Jewish people who need to eat kosher in order to have proper b'dan l'chavero, or it could be that even if a Jewish person eats non-kosher and has b'dan l'chavero, it could be that his madrega in b'dan l'chavero would be even higher if he would eat kosher. Okay, now I'd like to talk about a few halachas. First off, shopping for food. Rabbi Miller told me, Rabbi Miller is working with a star K in kashrus. He said it's very important to check for labels even on familiar products. He said especially store brands change, and it's important to check them. I'll tell a story that last year I was shopping in Shaw's for some Gatorade, and they had a pack of 8 drinks in one handle. And I checked one of the ones, and one of the bottles was kosher. Then I checked a different bottle, and it was not kosher. This was being sold in the same pack. Gatorade packaged kosher and non-kosher in the same pack. So I just wanted to bring out the story to show that how important it is to be vigilant to check products for kosher. Now I want to talk about bug checking. The rule with bug checking is that all vegetables are kosher. But sometimes bugs make their way onto vegetables. Now, bugs are the subject at the end of Parsha Shmini. Rashi Tzvayikra Parakid Aleph Pasuk Mem Daled says in the Gemara in Makos that person could violate 4, 5, or 6 negative transgressions by eating bugs. This is why eating bugs is a very serious matter. So how do we make sure our food doesn't have bugs? So So Rabbi Miller told me that bug checking requires training from a trained individual. Like if someone is a mashgiach, someone trained him how to check for bugs, can train someone else how to check. If a person doesn't have such training, there are many vegetables that do not require bug checking, maybe just like rinsing in water. Some of the ones we eat at the Monat household include string beans, carrots, cucumbers, mushrooms, and onions. That can, no, we have to talk about peppers. These foods that I mentioned are ones that can be eaten either just straight or just by rinsing off, do not require specific bug checking. Shaw's in Canton sells dull lettuce with a circle K. Rabbi Miller told me I can use that texture. So this is because lettuce is a big food that has bugs on it, but Shaw's sells food that already was pre-checked or verified to not have bugs. Dull lettuce with an OK. Shaw's in Canton. And a couple other foods, peppers. Rabbi Miller told me that bugs tend to congregate on the top crown.
Yeah.
So if you cut off the top crown down to where the green stem is, and cut down to the green stem and discard the top part, then the rest of the pepper can just be washed off and eaten. Pineapples, if you fully cut away the rind, the outside part of the pineapple, then the inside part can be eaten even if it's soft. For more information, you can Google star K bug checking for a whole list of foods that need they list probably like 70 fruits and vegetables, and they give over what needs to be checked, doesn't need to be checked. And bug checking is one situation when it's okay to bug out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, do you have any questions about bug checking?
Interesting, like some grasshoppers are kosher, right? Or some crickets are kosher.
Right, but
Locusts.
we don't have a Masorah about which ones are kosher now, so that's why we don't eat them.
Yeah, I know.
And to conclude, I'll mention that thanks to my mother who always packed me kosher lunch when I went to PhDS, homeschools, Torah Academy, and then when I went to Sharon Middle School, 8th grade, Sharon High School, 9th through 12th. I never ate the cafeteria lunch. I always ate kosher food for lunch. And I have no doubt that because my mother always used Mesiras Nefesh to take the time and the expense to pack me those kosher food, that I was able to avoid all of the negative ramifications of eating non-kosher. And then when I went to UMass Amherst and was viewed in a different light, I was able to perceive the sweet smells and the sounds of Ruchnius and be able to move on from UMass to Or Sameach and Yeshiva Good all the five sounds. So it's thanks to my mother for always packing me kosher lunch all these years.
My pleasure.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming.